Welcome to Town Meeting Television's continuing coverage of General Election 2020. Today we're talking to some of the uncontested candidates from South Burlington and also Burlington's South End. We have Barbara Rachelson from District 6-6. That's my neighborhood. Welcome, Barbara. And we have Maida Townsend, who is from South Burlington District 7-4, and John Killacky, who is from South Burlington 7-3. Martin Lalonde, who could not join us, is also uncontested. I have to make sure I have all the districts right. He's in 7-1. And as you noted before, Ann Pugh is in a contested race in District 7-2. So thank you so much for joining us. I just want to remind folks, if you would like to call, we certainly will welcome your calls at 802-862-3966. So we're going to just start with opening statements. And Barbara Rachelson, why don't you tell us why you're running for re-election and what qualifies you for the position?
Thank you, Lauren. So I'm Barbara Rachelson. I'm running for re-election, and my background is I am a social worker. I don't do direct social work. I went to grad school to work on policy because I really have been committed to social change since my high school and college days, I guess. And I've been an employer. I have run nonprofit organizations. I've been in the CEO role of two different nonprofit organizations for a total of 33 years. I have particularly been committed to working on issues related to children and families. Also, some of the serious problems that our society is struggling with now: addiction, mental health challenges, poverty. And I am a dedicated legislator. My colleagues will vouch for me that I am a sort of an obsessive researcher and want to always see what the evidence shows and like how have these policies played out in other places. I am not a fan of law of anecdote, and we seem to do a lot of that in Vermont. I also have served on a number of boards. I'm a mom. I was a working mother, and I'll end there.
Thank you so much. We'll talk about some of the issues that are important to you coming up. Thank you. Okay. Representative Maida Townsend, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us why you're running for re-election and why you're qualified.
Okay, thanks. I'm running for re-election to offer stability for my constituents in this very unstable time frame. The experience that I bring to the work is 8 years, having served in the legislature, the first 6 years on House government operations, and the last 2 years, this most recent biennium, on House appropriations.
Thank you so much. That was very succinct. Excellent. John Killacky, you are running, this would be your second term. The first term you had a bit of a contest and now you're uncontested. So that must be a little bit of a relief.
It is, and I did run into my opponent from 2 years ago in the post office the other day. We had a nice visit. We're all friends, of course. I retired from running the Flynn Center in downtown Burlington for 8 years, 2 years ago, and ran for my first term. And so as a citizen legislator in my first term, it was extraordinary for me because I was wanting this next part of my life to be about service. And in my first 2 years, I really focused on affordable housing, early education, livable wages, small businesses, the environment, recovery homes, mitigating homelessness, and improving conditions for women in our prison in South Burlington. It's been a profound 2 years, and I really hope that I can, I'm running uncontested. So as we rebuild our personal, social and civic lives, I really want to help Vermonters and continue my service.
Thank you so much. Maida, why don't we start with you? I'm going to hop right to the budget question. What does the FY22 budget look like to you, and how are you going to navigate the competing interests?
Well, there is a set approach, which we use for the budget. We take testimony from our policy committees, the committees of jurisdiction. We take testimony from all of the governmental agencies, and we take testimony from the public and the advocates. And then we set about we set about trying to put together what resources we have at hand to meet the needs, to best meet the needs of the people as we have understood them. Now, in this context, in this time frame, we have heard from our economist resources that budgeting in this COVID era is somewhat like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall or to ride a wild tiger. And having been a member of House Appropriations, putting together multiple budgets in this current calendar year, I can testify that yes, indeed, that is true. When we get to January to start work on first a budget adjustment for the current fiscal year 21, and also to start work on the full year, fiscal year 22, we really don't know yet what we will be facing, just as we really did not know what we would be facing when we came back in August to deal with the full year FY21 budget. But we do have very healthy reserves that we did not have to touch in any meaningful big way to meet the needs in the 21 budget, the fiscal year 21 budget. And we will simply have to assess where we are. I have to be very realistic and share that it will be very, very difficult, even with our over $200 million in reserves that are still sitting there to be used if necessary. We were very fortunate to have the $1.25 billion from the federal government in COVID money to use for the FY21 budget. And we believe we used those dollars very, very well.
So I'm going to just pause you because it's almost impossible to, in an extremely short time, summarize the work that you have done on the Appropriations Committee. And
That's
so
true.
I think you've given us a very high level, and we could talk for an hour on this question because you've really been on the front line there. I'm wondering, John, you are not on the Appropriations Committee, but why don't you tell us your view of the challenges ahead with the budget and your political philosophy on that?
Sure. I sit in general housing and military affairs. So affordable housing is something that we work a lot on, and that's certainly a big issue. And it's a concern about how we keep building and making Vermont more affordable. I want to go back. Maida is quite extraordinary in the budget, but in all this uncertainty, we did work with the House, the Senate, and the administration, and there was a balanced budget of $7.15 billion that was passed. And we continue programs, and we didn't really dip in significantly into the reserves, which is really important. Now that COVID money was essential, that 1.2, we're hoping that there'll be an additional stimulus package after November 3rd, or we hope it'll come in, and because it's needed. It is going to be very difficult. But I think what we learned in COVID is how to work differently. And I'm new to this, but I really saw in 3 weeks' time, we turned around the budget for the 9 months and stuff, because we all worked together with kind of shared principles in a way, and less siloed. And I think there's some systemic issues of the benefits of working that way. And I think really one of the things is not how can we do more with less, because the state has been doing that, and we'll talk about nonprofit sector later on. But we have to talk about how to do better with less. And I think we've learned some things with our COVID relief money, how we can do better. And I hope those examples resonate and continue to teach us.
Thank you so much. Barbara Rachelson, is anything you've heard resonate with you? And what is your thinking about the budget?
So,
22.
a couple of things. One is, I think it's a chance to, I think John is totally right. We can't do more with less. In fact, I think we might want to do less in some cases. I know that there are efficiencies that we can still realize from doing some educational consolidation, which I know is a touchy, big subject. I won't get into that. But also corrections. I'm excited to see or to hear that we're going to rethink corrections. It's a gigantic dollar figure, and our results from it are terrible. Like if if healthcare were that bad a result, we would be screaming and yelling. So we know that there are places we are spending money now that I think we really need to look differently. Same thing with the revenues. I just think that we also have seen one weird opportunity with COVID, which is people moving to the state. And so we need to look at people who can afford to buy houses over $1 million or very luxury items. Because we know, I'm hearing from constituents more and more how tough it is financially. Like as tough as people have felt in the past, it's worse now. So we do have to really, it's not gonna, I hope we don't do business as usual. And the under Representative Toll's leadership, they have involved the policy committees more, which has been great. But we also need a mechanism to say, we can save $3 million a year, but we're not gonna do that in the first year. Because again, we're always looking at that 12 months. And if we don't have a mechanism to kind of recognize that something will bring savings later, it's that whole prevention thing that we talk about. It's like, well, we have to have it by June 30th when the budget closes. So again, I'm hoping we can do some like out of the ordinary thinking.
Thank you. I'm just going to remind our viewers, if you'd like to give us a call, we're talking with candidates who are uncontested in District 66, the south end of Burlington, and in South Burlington. So you are welcome to call us at 802-862-3966. So John, you mentioned the impact of COVID on the budget process. Talk about what you think the impact of this health emergency has been on the state and where the opportunities are or the real areas of concern, just kind of your analysis about Vermont in the time of COVID.
Well, I'm going to talk about my experience on the committee. And one thing that we worked on during COVID is we had to really get our arms around the homeless population in Vermont because they could not really stay in shelters and congregate settings. We had to isolate and move people more safely into hotel rooms. And every January, there's a point in time survey done across the state saying, how large is our homeless population in Vermont? And those numbers are usually about 1,000 to 1,200 people. And they're imprecise because it's a day. But during the height of the pandemic, we had over 1,900 people in hotels. And 245 of those folks were kids. And so that's a big number. But it's also a number that we can get our arms around. And the amazing thing is we put an $85 million package together, COVID relief funds, that was systemic, that built out, we made shelters. They were renovated so that they could be socially distanced. We bought derelict properties and made them into homes for people. We have a program for landlords with derelict properties. They could get $30,000 to upgrade their property if they, for 5 years, allowed homeless or low-income Vermonters to live there. So we began to change some of the dynamics. And what is interesting to me is that this is a game changer for the way we really work with this population, because there's multiple needs. It's not just housing. I mean, housing is healthcare, but you also have a lot of wraparound services. And we really understood that integrating them was the way to go and not keeping things in silos. So for me, I think a lasting impact is if we look at rehousing people in a systemic way, there's a possibility to really significantly eat away at that 2,000 people who really don't have homes in our state.
Thank you. You know, you bring up something that's really interesting, and Barbara, you might opt to talk more about this, but problems that seemed really difficult and insurmountable before the COVID emergency, all of a sudden, people were able to get with it and bridge the gaps and collaborate and solve the problem. And I wonder if you saw examples of that, Barbara Rachelson.
Well, for sure, I must say, and Maida may have a better take on this since she and I started in the legislature at the same time. There was a lot of incredible goodwill among all three parties and getting things done in a way that I don't think I've seen. Like in general, I mean, Vermont's pretty good, but it was extraordinary how well everybody worked together. And I know locally with the effort John just talked about, I mean, it was pretty impressive. I've talked to a few of the local providers, including Rita Markley. I know how impressive it was that they were able to quickly house so many people. And I don't think anyone got COVID. I mean, it was just really of the homeless population. It was phenomenal because people don't always make that time for collaboration. And what I was hearing from my nonprofit buddies were it was that same thing we were seeing in Montpelier. People were really mission focused and did what they had to do. And thank goodness we live in a place that we have such caring people.
Yeah, thank you. Maida Townsend, tell us about your view of the COVID health emergency and what impact it's having on Vermont from your perspective.
Well, I think it provided a very clear light very quickly as to the fragility that an awful lot of Vermonters live with. It's particularly clear within communities that have been over time marginalized in various ways. And part of what we looked at as a legislature, both chambers as well as the administration, was how we could be supportive as quickly as possible in as many different ways, in a meaningful way, not just Band-Aids. For instance, what John was referencing is going upstream to deal with the housing issue, not just continuing to do quote unquote emergency housing, but to look at a means for providing good, solid housing for folks moving forward, a lasting kind of solution. And everywhere we could, I felt, in various bills as well as in the budget, wherever there was an opportunity to reach out to provide extra support to those who are among the most fragile in the state, that opportunity was taken, whether it was reaching out through the budget with regard to health disparities, communities of color, Native American communities, the homeless, folks living without good shelter, in a whole lot of various ways. Effort was focused there let me just leave that there since you wanted to focus on health. We also saw that it was necessary to provide stabilization for the healthcare system writ large. And we managed to do that in a meaningful way and framing it in such a way that it wasn't only the largest, most powerful players on the scene who were able to take advantage of what funds we could provide. We wanted to make sure that the smaller entities had an equal chance, and in some instances more of a chance. So because they were so little.
Great, that's good.
So,
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
again, COVID is one of those other topics that will take us a lifetime to.
But Lauren, Glenn,
Go
I
ahead,
think
John.
a factor is that as a rural state, we got $1.25 billion. And we had one of the highest per capita amount of money that came into our state because of our population. And so we had an opportunity, and we had to turn it around very quickly on this. And we had to listen to our providers, who we have really under-resourced for a very long time. And so we were able to hear from them solutions. So in my example, $85 million, that would be unheard of in any other budget year to say, if you had another $85 million, how could we do things differently? So I think this one-time infusion has been a game changer for systemic thinking. And now I think what we need to do is figure that out, as Barbara was saying, going forward. How do we look at this a little bit differently and listen to the nonprofit providers and the people doing the work in our state?
And I just want to point out too that at least some of the nonprofit providers and partners that we work with on House Judiciary, we were enticing them to do more. And they were like, oh no. I mean, one thing is there was a very hard deadline to spend the money. And so I think some of the nonprofits didn't have the capacity to be able to pull that off. So that's unfortunate, but Vermont was very lucky.
If I could I add in one little thing?
Yeah, please.
While that federal infusion, the $1.25 billion, was incredibly important, I think we need to give due regard also to how Vermonters, large numbers of Vermonters, paid those deferred taxes. You know, the taxes that were deferred back in April. It was astonishing. It went beyond what had been envisioned would come in the middle of the summer in terms of deferred tax money being paid. Incredibly helpful in meeting the needs of Vermonters and their communities. There was also the work within the departments and agencies. They scrubbed their budgets like crazy, scrub, and came up with something like $30 million worth of what are called reversions that we could drop to the bottom line to use, again, in support of Vermonters and their communities.
Thank you. Maida, I'm going to ask you the education question.
Yeah.
This is, deep background for you. And I think education financing has been talked about since 1990 when we started this channel. So maybe you talk about that. Tell us what you think is next for education financing. And I'm going to go find, while you do that, a light, because I realize that I'm
in the dark.
In the dark. So why don't you go ahead and answer that, and I will.
Yes.
We'll all be listening.
Okay. Well, clearly the funding mechanism for pre-K through 12 schools has gotten increasingly complex over the years. A piece that, if this were an easy situation or an easy question to solve, it would have been solved by now. There's nothing easy about this. There's no magic answer. But there is out there an entity called the Tax Structure Commission. It was established by statute in 2018, and they've been working like mad for the last 2 years. They're due to make their final report in January of 2021. And they've met over 25 times. They've been taking testimony from a variety of sources, a variety of people and organizations. And it's their job to make recommendations as to, based on all of the input and their study, how we should move forward as it relates to our tax structure. Obviously, right at the head of the list there, property taxes and the education tax. A similar tax commission presented its work back in 2010, suggested, for instance, looking at how we deal with tax expenditures, that sort of thing. But we never made much headway on their recommendations. Hopefully, now that 10 more years have gone by and people have gotten more and more just really hammered, shall I say. It's a huge burden that people are carrying. Hopefully the recommendations which this commission brings forward in January we'll see good conversation, good work to follow through moving
Thank
forward.
you. Yeah. John, you would be next on your approach to education financing. What needs to happen from your view?
Well, one thing I thought Maida might have mentioned, but I'll mention it, and she'll correct me if I didn't get it quite right. But what we did do is we held education property tax is for fiscal year 21 to what they would have been if COVID hadn't happened. So there wouldn't be an additional burden on Vermonters. So that was one strategy there. As a freshman in the halls in Montpelier, I hear whispered that, maybe property tax isn't the way we should go, and maybe we should really look at income tax and taxing in that way for our schools in Vermont. And I think it's an interesting idea to kind of pursue and analyze more. I did read the Blue Ribbon Tax Force, and so we've had a lot of study done about this. But there's, I would say, a lot of inaction as well. And I think Maida's right; the tipping point has happened, and I really hope we do look at either is property tax the best way or what other ways to do it. I think that's really what we need to do in this coming year.
Don't we, in effect, have an income tax-based education financing?
There is the income sensitivity piece.
Income sensitivity. But I'm saying that take it away from property tax and tie it directly into our state income tax.
Yeah. Okay.
It'd be separately. Yep.
Thank you. Yeah. Barbara Rachelson, your view on education financing. What's next?
Okay, so I spent my first term serving on House Ed, and there are probably 3 to 5 people in the state that can explain how it works. So one thing is we need a system that at least people can understand, because that makes it way worse. There's also some weird built-in dynamics of whatever budgets get approved, somebody's got to pay for them, and it's not always that school district. So I know I will miss Representative Donovan, who would repeatedly say to constituents when they said, "You're raising our education taxes." It's like, you're the one that's voting on your school budget, but still it's a bad system because again, I hear so much from people how high their property taxes are, especially in Burlington. I definitely have had many constituents move out of Burlington. Not all of them have left the state. It's concerning, and I've had a couple constituents try to game the income sensitivity because they're right on the threshold, and they will take time off without pay in order to come in right under it. I would like to see us we have fewer school districts. We also have fewer students. We need to put a cap on administrative costs statewide, because we're paying way more than we should for each supervisory union, because each one needs their own whole financial infrastructure.
Yeah, I just have a quick side question. Do we know anything about the impact of all these people that are moving into Vermont? Is there going to be is that a net gain property tax expected, or is it just a wash because other people owned those buildings before these people?
Well, there's the transfer tax, which is a good thing. I don't know. I thought you were going to ask if they have kids and if they're bringing more children into. I don't know. I mean, the data is like 8. Yeah, I have not been able to get too much detailed data yet, but I bet when we have our briefing in December, they'll present us with whatever population data is available.
Maida, did you have anything to add on that one?
No, I think Barbara's quite accurate that we don't have the information yet to know for sure what the situation is in that regard.
Thank you. Let me ask you the F-35 question, starting with you, John Killacky. People are very concerned about the noise of the F-35s. What kind of mitigation efforts are underway, or do you think needs to happen that could be affected through the legislature?
Well, in my committee, General Housing and Military Affairs, we do the National Guard, and so the F-35 is a very pertinent topic of discussion in our committee. Our committee did not move a resolution forward asking to ban the F-35s. Other people in the House are advocates for it. It's a federal decision. It is not a local decision. So I live in South Burlington. I know how loud they are. I have a horse in Williston, and the horses completely freak out when those planes go over the barn, and it's detrimental to them. I'm afraid they're going to break out of the pastures and stuff because it is so loud. So I know I have friends who have kids, and it's like we're living in a military zone, but it is a federal issue. And so there's almost nothing that our state legislature can do about this, unfortunately. The airport, and we've been all involved in looking at getting sound mitigation, which is essential in the corridors. I mean, parts of my Maida district has been destroyed by these planes in the airport. And so it's essential that we do protect and rebuild the sound for the homes in Winooski and in South Burlington and Burlington, and the schools as well. These planes are going over the schools, right over the schools. And so I think that that's a more effective place for the legislature to really impact citizens who live here.
I'm going to hop to Maida and ask you, as a South Burlington rep, what's your view on the noise mitigation? What do you think? What's got to happen next?
Well, first, if I could clarify, dear John, my district lost so many houses back before the F-35s ever even arrived. Yeah, okay. Because the sound levels from the airport had already reached a level which was considered uninhabitable. Yeah. So anyway, and just for the very public record, as folks in my district know, I have been opposed to the F-35s being here ever since they became an issue. But as John pointed out, it was a decision made quite out of our hands at the federal level. There is work being done. The airport itself just had a meeting last night, actually, for the public, a 2-hour meeting explaining how the master plan is moving forward, and made reference to the efforts they are making with varying degrees of success to get federal money to support sound mitigation. And there's going to be a pilot program, I think it's for 10 homes, just to see how this would work to provide the necessary insulation, windows, doors, that sort of thing, to mitigate the sound. There's also work to help at Chamberlain School, the little elementary school in my district, which is just it's a strong stone's throw from the airport. The sound levels, if the windows are closed in that little school, the sound levels are below the on paper objectionable levels. That's not getting into what it really is like to live with those levels of sound. But if the windows are closed, the sound levels inside the school meet the requirements. But since you can't open a window to maintain those levels, they're looking at, through the airport, providing money for an HVAC system so that the air within the school can be freshened the way it should be, kind of thing. So, you know, it's an ongoing issue and will take years to cover all of the homes. I mean, decades, literally decades to cover all of the homes, which might well be eligible for the work on their homes. And there's also the possibility that the airport might want to buy some homes from residents and do the sound mitigation and then resell.
Mm-hmm. All right.
I think there's pretty much been accord now that no more homes are coming down, if I understand correctly.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Go ahead.
I know the legislature, the mayor, our mayor, Mayor Weinberger, and the mayor of Winooski met with sort of the Burlington Winooski delegation before this year's part of the biennium, and asked for our support for the matching part of this federal grant. That would be the sound and also weatherization. So I know some of these federal monies do require a state match, and that might be the case coming up again.
10%.
So yeah, I must say, especially with changing their schedule to evening flying, I've heard more from folks about the noise.
Thanks, Barbara. Why don't you, we're getting down to our last question here. Why don't you talk about systemic racism in Vermont and the role the legislature has played, if you think it is adequate, if you think reparations are in order, and if you think an apology is in order for how we have treated Black people in this state?
For sure, I think that we should be looking at the reparations issue and the apology. I'm not sure it would have to be a really sincere, meaningful policy. I mean, not apology, I'm sorry. There's a bill that I put in last time that Kaya Morris and I were working on when she was in the legislature, and I'm really going to push for it. I've talked to Coach Christie about pushing for it again, which is to have a racial impact information available before we pass a bill to see what the policy implications might be on minorities and people of color in particular. About 10 states have done it, and it's way better to find out before we pass a law that it's going to have some unintended consequences than after. It's a lot like asking for a fiscal note, and I think it's important for us to try to stop the continuing to do more harm in addition to making reparations.
Thank you. Maida, your view of the role of the state in stopping systemic racism, meaning the legislature, and the need for reparations and or apology.
Well, I think we've made beginning steps in this, particularly in this last biennium, not only in terms of direct efforts at dealing with racial inequity, for instance, in terms and inequity for all folks in previously marginalized populations. For instance, we had an equity stimulus bill, which provided for our immigrant populations the same kind of stimulus support that others in Vermont received, but these folks didn't because of their immigration status. Well, we took care of that. We've dealt with health, at least a step with regard to health disparities and getting a handle on that as the racial issues exist in the context of law enforcement. We took a step with regard to having more civilian individuals on the training council, the group that oversees training of law enforcement, folks who have lived experience in terms of their being part of various crosscuts of our population here in state. We now have, with the Vermont state police through the budget, a civilian person of color co-directing the fair and impartial policing program. So we have taken steps, but they're only steps. And there are others that I haven't listed there. The whole question about reparations and apologizing, I think apologizing's a very nice thing, but personally I would prefer to see action that makes a difference in people's lives. There was a bill, a different bill, H 478, which was around this whole this whole biennium, which would have set up, if it had passed, it would have set up a task force to consider this very issue of reparations and apology, and to make recommendations on what appropriate remedies would be for this state.
But it didn't pass. It
never saw action. It never saw anything in the committee. They ran out of time, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you, John. Your response to this question.
Well, I think it's every committee's and each committee's responsibility to look at this in their own policy making. And so, in preparation for this, I thought, well, what did General Housing and Military Affairs do about systemic racism? Increasing the minimum wage, protecting victims of domestic or sexual violence from housing discrimination, renaming Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, making sure Indigenous names are in all state parks, agreeing with the treaty signed hundreds of years ago to have free fishing and hunting licenses for our Abenaki people. We did eviction and foreclosure protections during this time. We passed an inclusionary housing bill that you can no longer say a particular kind of housing is not appropriate for the character of a neighborhood. So that's it's called redlining. It's racist. Today I submitted a request to begin again our homeless bill of rights that we had been working on. Our committee was working with eugenics resolution on apology, and also to set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. There was talk, should we combine that with the other work of the other committee? And it's like, well, I'm not sure we should combine everything into one, because all of these things are important. Because, the eugenics movement is a horrifying chapter in Vermont history of racism, and, literally sterilizing people because they were Abenaki or because they were disabled. So there's that. Paid family and medical leave is an issue that we want to bring back as well, and that's going to have impact in communities of color. So I think all of these things help with the issue of systemic racism in Vermont.
Well, I want to thank you, John, for that response, and thank the three of you for your public service. We're very fortunate that you are willing to run for another season, another biennium. On November 3rd is the election, and you will be voting, if you haven't already, on Barbara Rachelson, if you're in the south end of Burlington, District 6-6, and Maida Townsend, who's in District 7-4, and John Killacky, who's in District 7-3. Martin Lalonde could not join us. He is also unopposed in District 7-2 in South Burlington, and Ann Pugh is in a contested race. No, Martin 7-1, Ann is 7-2. So thank you so much for joining us here tonight. It's just a pleasure to speak with you all. And thank you for watching Town Meeting Television's continuing coverage of General Election 2020. Thank you.
Thanks.